Hello everyone, this is Mature Muscle Podcast, and we've got season 3 kicking off. We've got episode 2 done in the bag, and this is episode 3. So we've got the sleep scientist Sophie Bostock here, who's going to talk to us about everything, pretty much. We've got so many questions from listeners that it was a tough one to know which ones to cut out and which ones to keep in, because there was stacks. But first of all, how are you doing, Sophie?
I'm extremely well, thank you, Lee. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's brilliant. I've been really looking forward to this. We've had this on the calendar for about 3 months, haven't we?
You've been very patient.
Yeah, well, it's worth the wait, I'm sure, because I've had so much interest. I think it'll all be justified. So just what got you into this whole subject? Because I know it's fascinating, but what drove you into it? Just give us a little bit of background about yourself, if you would.
Well, there's kind of 2 main accidents, really. The first one, from a kind of academic interest perspective, I was actually doing a PhD in a field called psychobiology, which is all about how we think and feel. So stress interacts with our physiological health. And I was particularly interested in happiness and what makes people happy and why happy people live longer. And in the course of my research, I started doing a study where we took stressed office workers and we used the Headspace mindfulness meditation app and to try and reduce stress. And we found that, perhaps unsurprisingly now with all the evidence that we've got, those people who meditated improved their mood, they improved their sense of control at work. But also a bunch of them came back and said, look, I don't know if I know how to meditate, but I'm definitely sleeping better. And so this was kind of a bit of a curveball for me, because I hadn't meant to study sleep at all. But actually, when I looked into the data and looked into the science, I realized that sleep is actually a real shield when it comes to stress, and of course improves positive mood. So I kind of got a bit diverted and started researching sleep, and then I went to go and work for a company with an online sleep improvement program.
Right.
And that was the second accident. The reason that I now do what I do was because I spent 5 years there at this digital health startup, brilliant company, Sleepio. We're trying to change the world with digital sleep medicine. And I worked quite hard, quite long hours. And despite the fact that
lack of sleep.
Yep. I was burning the candle at both ends, as many of us do. And although I was telling other people about how important sleep was, I definitely wasn't looking after my own. And this all kind of came to a bit of a head 3.5 years ago. And I ended up going on a very sleep-deprived climbing trip. And I made a number of really pretty stupid decisions that day, which I would attribute mostly to sleep deprivation. And I fell off a cliff, literally.
Wow.
I had to be airlifted to hospital.
Oh, really?
I had my ankle screwed back together with titanium pins. And in the course of my recovery, literally months of not being able to walk, I had a lot of time to reflect and really think. And I kind of came to the conclusion that knowing about sleep is just not enough. You absolutely have to change your behavior. And so I actually left my job to start this crusade, as it were, to try and encourage people not just to know more about sleep, but actually to change their behavior and really try and look after their sleep.
So you're kind of the opposite to a normal doctor, which is doesn't take their own advice and live a really unhealthy lifestyle and tell everybody else to do what to do. But you actually live in it.
I am that really boring person that you're at a party and they're kind of yawning, looking at their watch at 9:30, going, do you know what? It's been lovely.
Someone else I'd rather be.
It's okay, because it's in my professional interest, so I get away with it.
Yeah, brilliant. So that's a pretty nasty experience. I had a similar, I didn't fall off a cliff, but I climbed Kilimanjaro years ago. And the last push we did, meant we had to pretty much go through the night, from the early morning, right through the night, and then get to the top and come back down to base camp again, which meant pretty much 20 hours of continuous, hiking.
Activity,
It shouldn't
at
really...
altitude.
At altitude, exactly. And I was sleep deprived, but we didn't have any chance to get any rest at all, really. By the time I got back, I was in a right state. I mean, it really did affect me. And it wasn't just the exhaustion of the altitude. I mean, there was classic kind of sleep deprived symptoms, hitting me. But yeah, so I can feel your pain on that. So I've got a load of questions that I want to throw your way first. Just something that I've been interested in, and I know other people have been interested. And then I've got some kind of listeners' questions, which I said I've got loads of. So should we just kick off with those first, and then we can talk around them as we go? You often hear optimal sleep being bandied around. Is there such a thing? And if there is, does it vary from person to person, or is there kind of a standard? So you often hear kind of 7 to 9 hours, don't you, bandied around as an optimal amount of sleep. So what's your take on that?
Okay, so that 7 to 9 hours came from a really good, robust place. So in 2015, a whole bunch of sleep experts got together, they reviewed all the evidence, so hundreds of studies, and they looked at outcomes like next day performance, but also long-term health outcomes, heart disease, diabetes, weight gain, dementia. And they kind of drew everything together and they tried to come to a consensus. So they essentially argued amongst themselves until they came up with something they could agree on. And that 7 to 9 hours was the output of their agreement, because it's a bit of a debate. We are all different, and the amount of sleep that you need is a bit like your height or your weight or your shoe size. There's going to be some natural variation. So we talk about a bell-shaped curve where most people are in the middle and they're going to need 7 to 9 hours sleep. But there are definitely people at the extremes in a large population. We certainly know that there are some people who have a short sleep gene. They are very unusual. One estimate suggested about 1 in 4 million people who can maybe wake up after 5 hours and feel fully refreshed. And they will probably know who they are because they probably don't consume caffeine. They literally cannot sleep for longer than that. But there will also be people at the other end of the spectrum. And when we're talking about athletes, 7 hours for a very active athlete is probably not enough. The recommendation from sleep experts who work in sport is generally that 8 to 10 hours for a very active athlete might be better. And there are some studies that suggest that actually deliberately getting extra sleep can help with athletic performance. So you might have come across the concept of sleep banking, where before a crucial event, or perhaps before you're going to be sleep deprived. So let's say you just know that before a big event, you get very nervous, you don't tend to sleep as well, then actually a week beforehand, you can start trying to give yourself a little bit of extra sleep. So there's one study in endurance athletes, I think it was a cyclist and triathletes, found that 3 nights of extended sleep, so going up from 6.8 hours to 8.4 hours, led to a better endurance performance.
Really? That's fascinating.
But what we don't know is whether that's because they were sleep deprived and they just paid back a sleep debt, or whether actually getting a bit of extra sleep really enhanced performance. That's really a bit of a debate. But certainly, if you're getting less than your sleep need, paying it back is going to have dividends for your performance.
Because we talk about banking calories a bit, with weight loss. Because if you're going out for a pizza or something and a couple of drinks with some friends, if you bank those, that deficit, so in other words, you beat less during the week, and then you can have that little splurge because averages out over the week as normal or slightly still in the deficit. You see what I mean? So it's interesting that you could potentially do that with sleep as well if you've got a big night out.
Well, I guess the thing is, it's going to make you more resilient. So the studies show that you're going to suffer less from sleep loss if you've banked a bit of extra. You're a bit more resilient and you recover more quickly. That doesn't mean that I would recommend it as a recipe for day-to-day living, because whenever you are sleep deprived, you are going to experience some deficits. But you'll recover more quickly if you're generally. It's basically, you don't want to run the system too lean. If you've got a bit of extra in the bank, it definitely gives you a bit more leeway.
Yeah, no, totally. That makes total sense. So there's another word, kind of a buzzword you hear, especially more recently, I suppose, sleep hygiene. I know some of it to do with the type of light that you get late at night, like the blue, you want to avoid the blue light, and the light, the amount of light in the room as well, I've heard. So can you just maybe explain a little bit what's meant by sleep hygiene as a topic?
Yeah, it sounds a little bit unpleasant, doesn't it? It's
it does a bit.
The idea is clean sleep habits. It's kind of like clean living. And I think really it refers to building healthy habits around sleep and creating the right sleep environment. So I think probably the easiest way to think about good sleep hygiene is from the first moment that you wake up in the morning. So this will be advice that a lot of people are familiar with, but if you sort of think about from the moment that you wake up, in an ideal world, you want to be waking up at a regular time each morning, not lying in at the weekend. You kind of want these regular sleep patterns. You want plenty of natural light in the morning. That's going to kickstart your body clock, your circadian rhythm, give you plenty of energy for the day. You want ideally regular meal times, because again, that helps to regulate your circadian rhythm. You don't want to be eating too late at night, probably within 2 to 3 hours of bed. It could potentially interfere with the depth of your sleep. Right. You will probably also be aware of alcohol being bad news for sleep, smoking, too much caffeine. Whereas if you want to promote more good quality sleep, then regular exercise, switching off screens before bed, lowering the lights. We know that light an hour and a half before bed can start to suppress melatonin. So that's the hormone that stimulates or sort of signals to the body that it's time for sleep. So too much light in that last hour before bed is bad news. And then other stuff around bedtime, it means having a familiar wind down routine to transition to sleep. So most parents are brilliant at this for their kids, but terrible at it for themselves. The reason that we give a wind down routine for kids is because it's familiar and it slowly helps kind of cognitively, emotionally to calm them down, ready them for bed. But as adults, we often forget about this. We rush around, switch off the light, and our brains are still working overtime. So having a bit of a routine, bath, reading a book, for example, very simple things, but if you do them in the same order, the brain learns to associate those with rest and sleep. So there's a wind down routine, and then there's protecting the bedroom for sleep and sex and nothing else, and having a cool, dark, quiet place to sleep. I'd say those are probably some of the main sleep hygiene bits of advice that you'll hear.
It's interesting that you said about that, the light in the morning, because I very much like to wake up to light in the morning, but my girlfriend fiance likes to have everything battened down, which means that then I don't get that stimulus to wake up in the summer, especially in the summer. It's different in the winter because I get up pretty early before it's normally before it's light anyway in the winter. But so what would be the best approach?
She's on to a good thing for your sleep environment, because you do definitely want your sleep environment to be dark. And there's some studies that suggest that even a very low amount of light during sleep can interfere with the depth of sleep. There's one study that found that people are more likely to gain weight if they had lights on while they slept, which was interesting. The mechanism hasn't been proved, but you definitely want darkness for sleep. But then when you want to wake up, you do want to use light and as its immersive alerting signals. So there are various things which will wake up your body clock, and they're called zeitgebers or time givers that regulate your circadian rhythm. And light is the strongest. So light in the morning, particularly the early morning, is going to be good to get you going. But also there's now research that shows that natural light throughout the day is important. The more light you get in the morning, the less sensitive your eyes are actually to light before bed in terms of interfering with sleep. So if you spend your day outside, you can probably get away with using your phone before bed to a greater extent than someone who hasn't had a lot of exposure to light during the day. But food and exercise are also things which will get the body moving. So if for whatever reason you kind of have to be in a dark environment, at least walk around, have some breakfast. Those things are going to get your body clock going for the day.
Right, got you. So if you're on shift work and you do night shifts, you're pretty stuffed. It's not a good combo, is it?
Shift work is really, really hard, and it becomes even more important to manipulate your exposure to those zeitgebers. So we know that if you simply use either sunglasses or blue light blocking glasses on your way home from a night shift, it should make it easier to fall asleep again afterwards. That's one useful kind of way to think about light. But then during the day, having a really dark environment is very important.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. So you mentioned earlier on, you mentioned meditation would be quite helpful. So is there, just with dropping off to sleep, which a lot of people kind of struggle with, actually being able to turn the mind off, the old busy mind syndrome. I'm lucky I don't have that. I seem to be able to just drop off. But I know a lot of people do really struggle with that. So has meditation been shown to help with that?
Yes, it has. I would say when it comes to that sleep hygiene advice, a
Yeah.
lot of your listeners will have heard all of that stuff before. They may think that they're applying it. I suspect that actually, if you kind of go ruthlessly through your day and your evening, you might not be doing all of it. There could be more that you could do. But
Right.
what you might find, and what the research shows, is that if you suffer from insomnia, and by that I mean a difficulty falling asleep, waking up in the early hours of the morning, or simply waking up feeling unrefreshed for 3 nights a week or more, for 3 months or more. So this is a chronic dissatisfaction with sleep.
Yeah.
If you suffer from insomnia, then sleep hygiene probably on its own is not enough. And the reason being that once you've got into a pattern of what we call hyperarousal, so this is where the brain is still kind of alert. And exactly as you said, people complain about a racing mind, not being able to switch off. Then you've kind of got to go next level to switch off the stress response. It's like your brain has got stuck in high alert mode. And very often people with insomnia are very busy, and they're perhaps sort of overthinkers or busy thinkers, and they rely on stress hormones to keep them going through the day. So, you know, they've got adrenaline, cortisol racing through the bloodstream, just keeping them going, getting stuff done. But as I've said, if they then switch off the light at night and they haven't given themselves a chance to recover, they're not in the habit of switching off the stress response and being able to relax. The brain's like, what's going on? You know, it's all quiet. It's dangerous, and they end up in this kind of alerted state. So it becomes much more important in a scenario of a chronic sleep problem to really focus on the skill of relaxation. And there are lots of different ways that you can do that. Some people just find listening to music can be helpful. There's progressive muscle relaxation, where you tense your muscles,
release.
and then gradually release and kind of work your way through the body. Some people find that very helpful. I should say that the first time you try it probably won't make the blindest bit of difference, because it's new. And when something's new, it's quite alerting, arousing. But once you start to repeat it several times, then it can start to have an impact. And this kind of brings us on to meditation. So I'm particularly thinking about mindfulness, which was the area that I did research in, but there are lots of different variants of meditation. But really, the practice is on learning to concentrate on one thing, pay attention to the present moment, and allow thoughts and feelings to come and go. So you start to notice them, but just let them go. And you
acknowledge them and then let them go.
Exactly. And accept them and not fight them, but just sort of see them pass. And the guys that I work with at Headspace have some lovely animations where they sort of encourage people to think about, it's like pulling up a deck chair and looking at the sky. And it's like your thoughts and feelings are clouds, and you just let them go, knowing that there's blue sky underneath. So it can kind of give you this sense of calm. So the research shows that in a meta-analysis which combined lots of different studies together, they found that mindfulness-based stress reduction alone had small to moderate impacts on sleep quality. So there's no doubt that for some people it can be very helpful. But what I would say is that ideally you would combine that mindfulness with the good sleep hygiene. And then the more powerful way probably to tackle insomnia, the number one evidence-based solution, is an approach called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And that's really just a toolkit. It involves all that sleep hygiene stuff. It might well involve some mindfulness and some relaxation, but also tackling negative thoughts about sleep. Because what you'll tend to find once you have been panicked about poor sleep for a while is that you start to convince yourself that you're a bad sleeper, that you're never going to sleep well again. And the moment that you wake up and you're in bed, alert, awake at night, that leads to these kind of quite negative emotions of frustration or fear and anxiety. That tenses up the body, and your behavior in response to that is typically to get frustrated. You know, you roll over, perhaps you reach for your phone as a bit of distraction, and you do all these things that actually perpetuate that pattern of not being able to sleep. So one important tool from cognitive behavioral therapy is just, if you cannot sleep for more than 15 or 20 minutes, get out of bed. Stop wrestling with it. Don't create the bedroom as this battleground. Just say, okay, I'm not having a great night's sleep. That's okay. I've coped with this before. I'll cope with it again. Get out of bed. go and read or listen to music, even watch TV in another room with the lights quite low. And then hopefully after half an hour or so, you might start to feel sleepy again. And at that point, get back into bed.
Yeah.
So
Got you.
you want to reassociate your bedroom as this place where you sleep,
Yeah.
because you only go there when you're really tired. So if you're
Yeah.
not tired, don't go to the bedroom.
Gotcha. Speaking now about what goes on in the brain, because that's something I'm particularly fascinated about in terms of physiological effect of sleep. You hear about hormones being released and that kind of thing. So would you give us a little lowdown on that? So what goes on when you actually start shutting down?
Okay, so I guess the first things that happen are your sensory perception starts to weaken. So the first stage of sleep is called stage 1 sleep, and it's just a gradual transition phase, probably only lasts 5 minutes or so. And if somebody calls your name during stage 1 sleep, you'll immediately wake up. So this
Right.
is the stage that you get into on a really lengthy, dull Zoom call, or on a hot sunny day as you're just kind of nodding off.
Yeah.
We think that that's probably just there as almost a safety check, that it's going to be
Right.
safe to get into deeper levels of sleep. You can wake
Right.
up easily. Then you get stage 2 sleep, and this is often called true sleep. It's where we spend half of our time asleep. Our breathing rate, heart rate start to slow down. We're gradually transitioning towards deep, slow wave sleep, which is stage 3 sleep. And that, from a physical perspective, is the most physically restorative stage. So that's where growth hormone is produced. It's
Right.
really where the immune system goes to work. So your killer cells that kind of zap around getting rid of viruses, they're going to be particularly active during slow wave sleep. We also know that it's a stage when actually the gaps between your brain cells open a bit wider, and you get these pulses of electrical activity, and it's thought that this helps to suck out some nasty toxins, so beta amyloid and tau, which have been implicated in Alzheimer's disease.
Well, that's the plaque that can build around the nerve cells. Yeah.
Exactly. So slow wave sleep is particularly helpful for that sort of spring cleaning of the brain every night, to reduce the levels of toxins. Testosterone also produced typically during slow wave sleep. And then after slow wave sleep, you'll come back into a lighter phase called REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, which is where most dreaming takes place. And we know that the combination of deep sleep and REM sleep is really important for memory. So we both consolidate the most important memories and move them from the short-term memory storage banks in the hippocampus to the much bigger cortex. So we're really kind of storing stuff away for the long term, but also pruning things back. I think REM sleep is really important for getting rid of the memories that are less important, which frees up more capacity to learn the next day. Because if you've ever been in that state where, I don't know, been revising for an exam or something, and you just feel like your brain cannot take any more in, it's that saturation. We need sleep in order to almost squeeze out the sponge and just give us more capacity to learn the next day. So we cycle through these different stages of sleep. I should also say REM's really important for emotional balance. And we tend to get more deep sleep in the first part of the night and more REM sleep in the second part of the night. So when you go to bed very late, you are probably sacrificing some of that deeply physically restorative sleep, or as you get up very early, you're probably leaving yourself more open to emotional instability.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, so you can wake up in a bad mood. Would that tally?
Yep.
Yeah, that's yeah.
The other
I'm not
thing about
speaking about
waking
myself,
up,
obviously.
no, of course. I think the other thing about waking up, sometimes people will say, oh, I think I slept too long last night. I woke up and I felt really groggy.
Yeah.
So it does depend which stage of sleep you wake up from. And for the most part, if you don't use an alarm, people will typically wake from a lighter stage of sleep, often REM sleep. And we think you remember your dreams about 70% of the time if you wake up from REM sleep. But if you're using an alarm and it's waking you up from deep sleep, that's when you can feel incredibly groggy. And the more sleep deprived you are, the more of this sleep inertia you get. So it's very normal to have 30 minutes of sleep inertia. It can go on for as long as 2 hours. So it doesn't mean that you've had too much sleep. It just means that you've woken up from the middle of a sleep cycle.
It's interesting because I used to have this app which timed it well. It's relied on movement to figure out which part of a cycle you were in, and it would wake you up nearest that cycle. But obviously, if you've got to wake up at a certain time, I mean, sometimes I've got clients that's 6 a.m. It's not a choice, and there's no way I'm going to wake up naturally like that. So,
well, you could do if you
went to
trace
bed at
it
8
back
o'clock.
and give yourself enough sleep each night. So the theory is, if you've got very regulated sleep patterns, so if you wake up at the same time, if you woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning every day of the week, and actually you did protect enough time for sleep, your body would start to be able to anticipate that. Your circadian rhythms would be in sync with you getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning. And at about 5:30, your body would start to produce cortisol. You would find yourself waking up before your alarm.
Right.
But when your sleep patterns are more haphazard, your brain cannot anticipate what's going to happen next, and
It makes
you're
sense.
no longer in sync.
Gotcha. So yeah, I'm glad you brought up REM sleep, because that was one of the other questions I had. So I've got some listeners' questions. There was one about sleep apnea. Could you explain that a little bit? Because that's I've heard it again, but I'm not entirely, other than a breathing issue, but it's not necessarily what you'd think. So I'll let you fill us in on that.
Yeah, I think this is really important. It's not that well known about sleep apnea. So this is a condition where you have temporary pauses in breathing during sleep. It's usually associated with very loud snoring. So if it's typically identified by a partner, you probably are not necessarily aware that you do this, but if you snore very loudly, and then perhaps sometimes you have pauses in your breathing and then gasp for breath. So sleep apnea, I don't really want to do a demonstration, but it is kind of pausing and breathing, and then someone kind of snorts, almost like, they sort of can almost wake themselves up. And in fact, this is what's happening. So the soft tissues in your palate or your tongue or your throat are collapsing during sleep. It's more common when you're on your back and you've obviously got gravity pushing down. And so the tissues temporarily actually block your airway, so you stop breathing. But the brain kind of wakes up after you haven't had any oxygen coming in for a little while and says, oh, you'd better move. So you get the stimulus to move, but not enough to fully wake you up, but just enough to disturb you from deep sleep, because in deep sleep, your muscles are very relaxed.
Right.
So the overall consequence is that people can sleep for a normal amount of time, but when they wake up, they are exhausted. And people suffering from sleep apnea will often be very sleepy. It's associated with quite a lot of car accidents, this kind of undiagnosed sleep apnea, and also depression and also heart disease, because if you're not getting enough deep sleep, you're not giving your body and your brain enough chance to recover. So the risk factors are getting older, unfortunately, being male, having a thick set neck, being overweight. But honestly, I've met people in their 20s who are female, who are very slim, who can still suffer from sleep apnea. So those things put you at more risk, but they don't necessarily mean that you won't have sleep apnea. So if you have any concerns about that, it definitely is worth chatting to your GP, or you can actually order an online sleep test, which will measure your oxygen saturation during the night, which is the best way of telling whether or not you're having these apnea episodes.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. The I've been shared a room with a friend who had that, and it's quite, when you're listening to it, it's actually quite scary, because you'll hear that silence and then you'll wait for it, and then they go and it's
it's also very, very difficult to sleep. So
it really is.
Most of us can sleep with a bit of noise, but intermittent, unpredictable noise is the most alerting. So if you do sleep with a snorer or a sleep apnea sufferer, there are various things that you can try. So often just more regular exercise or weight loss will help to reduce snoring, because it helps to increase muscular tone. But there are also some exercises. There's a sort of practice known as myofunctional therapy, which helps people to develop the muscles of their tongue and soft palate to just strengthen them. And that's also been shown to be effective for people with mild to moderate sleep apnea. So if your partner does snore, Google some myofunctional therapy, and there's effectively these exercises where you exercise your tongue. So you stick your tongue out and you push your tongue from side to side, just for kind of 8 minutes a day, and over a couple of weeks that can reduce snoring.
Right. Okay. Because correct me if I'm wrong, but when you get deep sleep, you become paralyzed anyway, don't you? Is that right, or is it partly paralyzed?
That's in REM sleep, where
Oh,
typically our muscles are paralyzed in order to, well, the theory
stop
is
you
in order
hurting
to
yourself.
stop us acting out our dreams. Exactly,
Yeah.
because actually there is a disorder called REM sleep behavior disorder, where that doesn't happen and people do start to act out their dreams, and they can cause injuries to other people and it can be quite dangerous. So
Mm,
yeah, we don't typically move during REM sleep. But
yeah.
there is some movement that occurs during sleep, and I think important for viewers to know, between some of these sleep cycles you'll have a period of lighter sleep, and as we get older, often those lighter sleep periods will lead to a short period of arousal. In other words, we wake up.
Mm,
So that doesn't necessarily mean that you've had a bad night of sleep. It's just probably a gap between sleep cycles. You should be able to just roll over and go back to sleep again. But
mm,
what can happen when you start worrying about sleep is that you wake up and you go, oh, why have I woken up?
mm.
And that kind of kickstarts this anxiety cycle. So just be reassured that actually waking up during the night is pretty normal. It's just most of us roll over and forget about it by the morning.
Yeah. I had an experience, like I was about maybe 10, I think, and I remember hypnagogia. When I woke up frozen and paralyzed, and there was a skeleton sat on my windowsill, utterly
Nasty.
terrified,
And
and
you couldn't move,
couldn't move. And I
presumably.
thought
No.
it was because I was so scared that I was like, I can remember it clearly. And the skeleton kind of, I don't know why it was a skeleton, weirdly, but it kind of faded, like an after, when you look at the sun, and that fades. It faded away, and then I was able to move again. And then I screamed the house down. I was only 10, but
And
I remember
you
it
can still
clearly.
remember this.
Terrifying.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yes,
yeah.
this is utterly terrifying. So anybody who hasn't experienced this is sleep paralysis,
Yeah.
where part of your brain, essentially what's happening is part of your brain's woken up, fully awake, but part of your brain is still kind of told the body that's in REM sleep, so that the body is paralyzed. And they're very often associated with terrifying experiences. Sometimes people feel that someone's in the room with them, or they're being suffocated.
It's
And
sat on their chest
the,
or something, isn't it? Like,
yes,
yeah.
and they can last usually only 20 or 30 seconds, but for the person who's experienced them, it can feel like an awful lot longer.
Yeah.
And the theory behind what's going on, they often happen when you're very sleep deprived or
Mm,
stressed, and
right.
it's a disorder of the stages between sleep. So there's a sort of dodgy switch between sleep and wake, or between different stages. And so the same thing kind of applies to sleepwalking, sleep talking, where you've got these, we call them parasomnias, the weird behaviors that develop. So the best approach to dealing with it is probably just try and get more sleep, improve your sleep hygiene, regular sleep patterns, and coping with any stress that you're under.
Amazing. That's I was glad when I found out I didn't actually see something horrible on my windowsill for years later. I've got some literally just sent in earlier today. I'll throw these your way as well.
Okay.
Menopausal sleep, how to combat it. Is that something that you can identify with?
Yeah, it's a big old area. I mean, very common to have sleep problems. Probably more than 60% of women have sleep problems during the perimenopausal, postmenopausal period. The number one treatment is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So
Right.
even though the causes might be hormonal, our best approach in terms of treatment is actually dealing with the unhelpful thoughts and reinforcing positive sleep habits. So this is not going to reduce, for example, hot flashes. Those are still going to happen.
Right.
Flashes in America. They're still going to happen, but they make it much easier to deal with. So you'll be able to go back to sleep, for example. To actually deal with the hot flushes element and the kind of disrupted thermoregulation, HRT is probably the most effective solution.
Yeah.
Some trials have also found that, light moderate exercise, even yoga can help. I think that's probably more from a stress management
Yeah.
perspective than anything else. But yeah, it's kind of it's both about the education about why the sleep is going wrong, and not worrying about it too much. If I had one thing to solve
Yeah.
or to try and help with a lot of people's poor sleep, it's just kind of worry about it a bit less.
Right. Well, it's
Easier said than done.
I
But
was just going to say it's one of those things. Stop
sleep
worrying about it.
sleep deprivation is normal, but often menopause is a time when people have got an awful lot of other stuff to worry about as well,
Yeah.
and some of the hormonal issues are just kind of exacerbating a really
Right.
difficult time of life. So I think just cutting yourself some slack
Yeah.
is just kind of saying this is normal, this is not just you, and it will get better.
This one is quite a good one for me as well, because I do, with the kind of weird job that I have where it's all over hours all over the place, I often do use these myself, like power naps. Now, can you get any benefit from a power nap? Is it, because I've heard two different opinions on this. One was that you can't catch up on sleep. If you've got bad sleep, you've got bad sleep. That's it until you get a lot more sleep. But I've also heard that power naps can actually be useful. So what's your take on that?
Okay, so there are pros and cons, definitely. I would say power naps in general, really helpful strategy. In an ideal world, we would be getting consolidated sleep, a good 7 hours of consolidated sleep at night. The reason that's really important is because when you have multiple sleep cycles, we know that the brain and the body kind of self-regulates a bit. So for example, if you run a marathon, you're going to have a lot more deep sleep. And the more you have multiple cycles, the more the brain can kind of start to compensate for what's happened during the day. So
Right.
a strategy that only relies on napping wouldn't give you that opportunity to sort of self-regulate with the right amounts of different sleep cycles, different sleep stages for what your body actually needs. But a brief nap, particularly when you're sleep deprived, so if for whatever reason, perhaps you've got young kids or you're working shifts, a power nap can be really helpful to kind of add to that nighttime or consolidated sleep period. The reason that a power nap was coined a power nap by NASA was because they realized from all the research that if you nap for 20 minutes, you're very unlikely to get into deep sleep. That usually happens after more than half an hour. So you're not going to get sleep inertia afterwards. In a
Right.
brief power nap of 15 to 20 minutes, you're going to get some stage 1, some stage 2 sleep. Depending on the time of day, you might get a bit of REM sleep, but it's going to increase your alertness. It's going to increase your mood, going to pep you up a bit. And often it's been shown to improve memory as well. So it's very unlikely to do you any harm if you have your power nap, perhaps after lunch. There's a natural circadian low for most people between about 1 and 4 p.m., where we
Right.
have a kind of natural lull in our energy levels. So that's a really good time for a power nap. If you have your power nap very late, and I'm thinking here of parents who put kids to bed and accidentally fall asleep while they're putting their kids to bed at
Yeah.
7 or 8 o'clock, they then tend to have difficulty falling asleep afterwards because
Right.
they've used up sleep pressure. So normally the longer we stay awake, we build up sleep pressure. So if you ease that sleep pressure just before bed, it could actually make it harder to fall asleep again afterwards. But if you are very sleep deprived, actually having a longer nap of kind of 90 minutes would be very restorative. And if you're a very active athlete, often having a nap in between, like a morning and afternoon training session, that's going to help with muscle repair. It's going to help with reducing pain perception, reducing inflammation. That could well be a sustainable strategy to make sure that you're getting kind of your 8 to 10 hours sleep versus the average sort of 7 to 9.
Excellent. Actually, there's one other thing that I remember reading not that long ago, was about sleep patterns that used to happen, years ago. I'm talking, medieval times. People used to sleep in 2 blocks. Is that right?
Two sleeps.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a
Is
guy
it
called
true,
Roger
or is that?
Urkic who's written a book about this, and he's drawn from lots of historical sources of people mentioning multiple bouts of sleep during the night. But I think the modern day take on it would be that, yep, possibly that did happen. It probably wasn't a universal
No.
thing. I think when we look at hunter-gatherer populations, sort of the more less well developed societies in around the world, they tend to still sleep in a consolidated bout at night. They might well have some people within the tribe who are staying up to kind of keep watch for things, but the vast majority of people are going to be getting their sleep in a consolidated bout. They may well also have naps, but often these are kind of areas around the equator where it's very hot, and
Yeah.
so having a siesta kind of makes sense in that post-lunch period. So I think the jury is out, to be honest, on
Yeah.
that.
Okay. It's not quite as cut and dry as that it's been made out then, maybe.
Possibly not.
Right, let's see. And then there's another one here. What is there an optimum golden hour, inverted commas, like between 10 and 11? Have you heard that? That's kind of an optimum time to...
I think there was some research that came out not that long ago that actually suggested that people who fell asleep, I think it was between 10 and 11, had lower rates of heart disease than people who fell asleep much later or much earlier. And I think for a lot of our biological rhythms, that makes sense. We do know that we get more deep sleep in the first part of the night. So if you go to bed between 10 and 11, you're probably not cutting short that deep sleep. But it depends on your individual circadian rhythm. So we know some people are more natural night owls and some people are early birds. And if you're a personal trainer, you probably veer towards the early bird end of the spectrum.
If only.
I'd like to think that over time you could adapt your body clock. Definitely our body clocks change. So as kids, you'll typically be an early bird. As teenagers, you tend to shift back to a much more night owl pattern. And then going to bed between 10 and 11 will be really hard because your internal drive to sleep doesn't kick in until much later. So teenagers often have a really tough job actually, because they've got to get up for school at a time when their body clock, it's like me trying to wake up at 5 a.m. Is them waking up for school at sort of 7 a.m. It just feels really
I read
hard.
that there were even some suggestions they should start school later, weren't there? Around 10 and then
so
go
in the
through
US,
till 6
in America, a lot of schools were starting very early, before 8 a.m. for teenagers. And they found that by shifting the school start time back, I think only to like 8:30 or 9, which is more like a British time, they found improvements, not just in performance at school, but also a reduced number of road accidents, because a lot of these teens were driving to school at times when they really weren't alert enough. So it's cut your kids some slack if they're teenagers. They will need lots of natural light in the morning in order to sort of wake them up, but they also need to be really cautious late at night, not being exposed to bright light, because they're really going to struggle to fall asleep if they're on computers, video games in the early hours of the morning. Your brain is actually more sensitive to the effects of light after, say, between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. in the morning. If you get bright light then, it just delays your body clock further. So the following night, you're going to find it even harder to fall asleep. Whereas bright light first thing in the morning actually advances the clock and makes it easier to fall asleep earlier.
Right, excellent. And the last one is regarding overtraining and exercise. So I've also heard that if you overtrain, then your sleep can suffer. Now it's a strange one because it sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? Really, that if you're overtraining, you naturally think you'd be more tired and therefore sleep easier, but obviously not quite true.
I think overtraining is another one of these stressors. So we can have mental or psychological stresses, but you can also have physical stresses. And when you're not giving your body a chance to recover, it is basically going into panic mode. So you get more stress hormones, more cortisol to just kind of keep you going, keep you powering through. And that's exactly what is going to interfere with you getting into deep sleep. So cortisol is the natural enemy of melatonin. If you've got cortisol in your bloodstream late at night, that's going to interfere with the production of the sleep hormone. So your sleep becomes lighter, you're more likely to wake up during the night. So yeah, the evidence from athletes is that overtraining, definitely insomnia is often a symptom. So then it becomes not just a case of perhaps easing back on the training, but also trying cognitive techniques to switch off that stress response. So that's where the meditation, where the progressive muscle relaxation comes in.
Right, brilliant. So if we were to say, kind of put that into 3 action plans, if you like, to take away for the kind of listeners who are going to be tuning into this, I'd say the 40 plus generally, they're hopefully exercising regularly, and they might have busy jobs or whatever. So if we were to say take 3 in importance, what would you dial in on those 3 being take away and do today kind of thing?
Well, we can't kind of skimp on duration of sleep. So I think about sleep in terms of duration, how long are you actually sleeping for, when are you sleeping, so the timing of your sleep, and then quality, what good quality sleep are you getting, and hopefully you are in control of one of those aspects. So in an ideal world, we'd all be protecting at least 7 hours for sleep, because we all wake up during the night and it takes us time to switch off. Actually, you kind of want to allow 8 hours in bed in order to get your 7 hours sleep. So think about seven as the bare minimum, and then give yourself a bit of leeway either side of that. There's so much research showing that is the amount of sleep that we need to protect our health. Like, let's not fight that. And if you can't get that at night, then having naps during the day, actually power naps after lunch can be a really good way to just kind of increase that level a little bit. So that's sort of the duration of sleep. And then on the timing of sleep, regularity is absolutely key. That if you can wake up, if you ignore going to sleep, because actually on different days we do need different amounts of sleep. If we've been very physically active, we might need to go to bed a little bit earlier. But if you just focus on your wake up time and wake up at the same time as often as you can, so ideally at least 5 days a week, and if you can manage 6 or 7, that's going to be even better. But that's going to anchor your circadian rhythms. That means that your body will start to anticipate sleep time, anticipate wake time. You will wake up with more energy, and you will start to feel sleepy at the same time each day. So I think of all of them, actually, the timing of sleep is probably the most important. And then finally, in terms of quality, timing will help as well, but I think there is just more and more research coming out about the importance of natural daylight, and this is something that is absolutely free for all of us. So spending more time outside. So if you've got the option of going to the gym or going outside, I'd say get outside. It's going to really help with your sleep.
Right. Well, that is brilliant. Thank you for that. That's so much information there. My brain's kind of exploding with all that. But at least I've got the ability to watch it back as many times as I want here. No, thank you very much. That was brilliant. It's so much good, useful data there to give out to everyone as well. I'll also put all your links because I think I've got most of them. But if there's any that you've got that you want me to share specifically, like your social media links or anything like that, just drop them over to me, and then I'll put them onto our show notes at the bottom.
That's great. Just website and Instagram would be great. Thank you.
And what are you doing? What are you doing at the moment? Is there anything that people can know about that you're up to in terms of like any courses or?
So I've just launched a course for the police across the country. So all police officers and staff have got access to a new course that I've written. So we'll see how that goes, and then hopefully potentially make that more widely available in the future. But if you are a police officer or staff, then go to Oscar Kilo and you can find out more about that.
Brilliant. If you send me the link to that, I'll put that in as well. Amazing. Thank you very much, Sophie. It's been excellent.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. I'm glad we got to speak. Thanks for your patience.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
All right. Take care. Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode of Mature Muscle, please subscribe and find us on most social media. Until next time, stay shredded.